Hey everyone, in this video I'm going to talk about the Autotask to Xero integration using Cloud Depot. So if that is of interest to you, then this video is for you. Hey everyone, Chris Timm here from Sundela Consulting. In this video I'm going to talk about how to get invoices out of Autotask into Xero using the Cloud Depot integration. So let's go and take a look at how this works. So the very first thing we want to do at this point is we need to come into Autotask and we need to create an API user. So one of the first things we do is we click into the admin, go into resources and users, and then we simply drop down the little box here next to the new button, go into API user, and simply all we do is fill in this information. So this could be Cloud Depot, integration, so whatever you want to put in at this point. Generate a key, generate a secret. And then it's very important to make sure you select the integration vendor here, and this is going to be, in this case, Cloud Depot. So what we simply do is go Cloud Depot Xero, and then here we have the username and the password. You just want to save these out into Notepad or something similar, because we're going to actually go ahead and use these later. Simply all you then do is click on Save and Close, and you should be good to go. What we then have to do is one other thing we need to do inside Autotask is if we go into Admin and then System Settings, and then what we want to do is under the Contracts area, we want to come in here and make sure that we leave the next invoice numbering to be blank. So you can see it's not enabled. Simply click here to edit, and then what this will do is if there is a number already entered in there, then what you simply want to do is to take this number out, click on Save and Close, and say yes. And the reason that we're going to do this is because we're going to use Xero to actually write the invoice number into Autotask. So we do not want Autotask to do auto numbering. And that's it. So as far as Autotask is concerned, that's pretty much all we need to do. What we then need to do is come into Cloud Depot. So the first thing you'll need to do is click on the Autotask integration. Mine's already connected, but there will be a connect button. You'll simply enter in those username and passwords for those API accounts you created earlier on. That should connect you into Autotask, and you're good to go. Do the same thing with Xero. Simply click on connect into your Xero account, and you're good to go, and that should work for you fairly easily. What you then need to do is here under the My Accounting toolbox, simply click on Configuration, and then the first option we want to go through is the Xero options. So let's go through these in detail and look at how this works. So this is asking how should invoices be imported into Xero. So I normally leave this as draft, but of course you could change this to push it straight in as, set as sent or approved, whatever the case might be. Normally it's good to leave it as draft so that they come into Xero as a draft. You can check them, make sure they're all okay before you submit and send them. This is now asking about the Xero invoice numbers. And if you remember, we set this earlier on a few seconds ago where we made the auto numbering and Autotask blank. And that is because we're going to use the Xero invoice number. You could, if you wanted to, choose to use the Autotask invoice numbers. I can see here this says not recommended. And I don't recommend doing that either. The reason being is, customers are used to seeing your Xero number. You're probably going to be doing other invoices in Xero anyway. So what you want is that consistency. So you want to push the invoices out of Autotask into Xero and then have Xero write those invoice numbers back so that the Autotask invoice is actually the same number as the Xero invoice. This is then asking you for the invoice due date. So I will show you where this is going to be in a few minutes when we actually go in and create something in Autotask. But what we're doing is we're telling this to use the Autotask due date at this point. Okay, then we want to go into advanced options. And under the advanced options, we want to make sure that these two boxes are ticked. Basically, all this is saying is if a contact already exists, it's going to update the contact. So things like phone numbers, email addresses, all those kind of things is going to be automatically updated. And then turn off case sensitivity. What it used to do before is if there was any difference in the case, it would actually create the contact again. So what we want to do in this particular instance is we want to say match it even if the case is different. Then the other thing we want to do is we want to send the payment dates back into Autotask as well. And this is quite important because this means when we then mark them as paid, the invoices as paid in Xero, we want to make sure that we are bringing that paid date back into Autotask and updating the paid date from there as well. So one of the things, once we've done that, we might then want to look at some of the other options in here. So if you are in a country outside of the US, one of these countries pretty much, so Australia, UK, New Zealand, South Africa, where you just have one tax region, then you do not need to come and set any of this up. But otherwise, you would need to come in here and tick Enable Tax Mapping, and then this would just allow you to take whatever the tax code is in Autotask and map it to the relevant Xero tax code. I so happen to have done this, but I actually don't need to, because when the invoice comes into Xero, it automatically applies the tax, and you only have one tax region, so there's no point in necessarily doing this. The one thing that is important to look at this point, though, is to come into here and link account codes. So what these account codes are is these are going to be things like the billing codes inside Autotask. So let's go into Autotask and let's have a look. So if you go into Admin, Features and Settings, and then we come under Finance, Accounting and Invoicing, and here you can see billing codes. So everything that's here under a work type is a labor billing code. So this is going to be posted into an income account in Xero, or GL account or GL code, whatever you want to call it. These names here are going to be mapped through into those income accounts in Xero. So anything that's a work type is labor. Anything that is a service is typically dealing with things like Microsoft 365 and backups and antivirus and all these things that you're selling on a monthly basis or a term basis, yearly, quarterly, whatever the case might be. Those are going to be listed as service codes. And then any physical hardware and software and materials that you're selling of any kind, those are going to be material codes. So these names can actually be anything you want them to be in Autotask, because what you can simply do is just map those to the relevant place when they come into Xero. So all this is going to allow us to do at this point. If you click in here, you can see what we're basically saying is, we have maybe a material code called hardware. So if we come into here and we find the hardware one, or in this case, maybe we're going to do, a particular, let's actually just change this. Let's change it to monitoring services. Then we say, monitoring services, maybe this is going to be, under IT software and consumables, whatever the case might be. I just so happen to be using a test one in here, but you would map this to whichever GL code you wanted to map it to, then simply click on link and you're good to go. Now, what this is saying above here is anything that isn't mapped down here. So any of this, labor account code in Autotask is mapped to my 200 sales revenue. And, software as a service is mapped to IT services and consumables. It's not an overhead, but it just so happens to be mapped to that. What you could do, though, is if there isn't a mapping down here, then it automatically maps this into the standard default revenue code that you have set up inside Xero. And that's it. It really is very, very simple, very straightforward. You can do the same thing with purchase orders, link all of these codes together. If you don't know what they are and you don't want to link them together, that's fine. You can just leave these all blank, because what it'll then do is bring everything in as the 200 revenue in this case, and then you can go ahead and actually have that, being changed in Xero later on, whatever the case might be. And that's it. It's as easy as that. What we then need to do is we now need to go into Autotask and do the billing through Autotask and get the stuff into Xero. So let's do this. So to run the billing process in Autotask, we click on Approve and Post. And I'm going to go ahead and approve and post some recurring contracts. And I'm going to go ahead and, invoice all of the recurring contracts for May. And what I'm going to do is to just pick a particular customer. In this case, I'm going to come into here under Karen Properties. And these are all of the things that I'm going to invoice this customer for this month. So what the Approve and Post allows you to do, make sure that all of these are correct. If you need to make any adjustments in here, you can do that. Once you're happy with that, what we're going to do is we're going to post these and create invoice items from them. And those invoice items are then going to allow us to generate the invoice and send that invoice through into Xero. So what we now do is we click on items to invoice. We make sure we select the correct date in here. And let's just pick, in this particular instance, the same company. And here is everything that needs to go ahead and be invoiced. So you can see that, you know, the total amount that we are charging this customer for that month is £1,700. Simply, all I'm going to do is now click on preview and process invoices. So this gives me the ability to now come into here and click the process invoices button. But before we do that, this invoice date here is important as well. This is the date that is going to actually go through into Xero and create the invoices on that date. So because I happen to be doing this on the 22nd of April, but I've invoiced the customer for the services in May, I might want to actually change this invoice date to be the 1st of May. And then we had one of the options in Cloud Depot, if we go back into Xero options, it was this invoice due date. So here we're saying pick the Autotask invoice due date. And that basically comes from here under the payment terms. So this is basically saying, you know, if we set this as 30 days, then the invoice due date in Xero becomes 30 days from the date of the invoice. Of course, you could have come in here and just changed this to whatever you want, so you can make it 30 days anyway. But I always like to just tell it to use the Autotask due date, because then I can set this at the Autotask level. And this will actually pull it from whatever you've got inside the invoice template anyway. So it really is as simple as that. All we now need to do is simply click on process invoices. So what you will see happen here is this invoice will go ahead and get generated. Once this invoice is generated, what it will do is it will actually go through and then push this through to Xero. Now, one of the things you'll notice in here, because we turned off the auto numbering, it does have an invoice number in here, but this is actually the invoice ID. So when this synchronization happens, what you'll see is that this will actually end up being the INV number of Xero. And I'll show you that in a couple of seconds when we go back into that. So what we're going to do in here is we're going to click on invoice history. And we're going to check all the invoice history that we've done for today. And we should see, maybe it's actually for May. Invoice date, sorry, yeah, I changed this to May. So we need to pick the invoice date for May. And we simply go ahead and we search for this. So here we can see the invoice with invoice ID 25. And this is now going to be processing in the background. Xero Cloud Depot is going to be pulling this through into Xero. Now, of course, at this point, we can leave it. I have the synchronization that happens every few minutes. But what I actually am going to do is I'm going to go ahead and say, you know, let's just pull this information in. And I'm just going to force the sync to happen. So I'm going to click the Sync Now button by clicking on the Sync Logs tab. What will happen now is you'll start to see this is saying it's found the invoice, it's created this invoice, and it will be created on the next cycle. And it's invoice ID 25. So if we come back into Autotask, you can see there is invoice ID 25. Okay, so what you'll now see is that it's now gone over into Xero. So you can see that the sync process has completed. If we look at Xero, you'll see that under Xero, in Xero, we have one draft invoice. What that will basically give you the ability to do is to see this invoice. So if we click on it, now you can see all of these service bundles. And here's the 2048 invoice. And if we go back into Autotask and we do a refresh inside Autotask, what you will now see is this invoice number has now been put into Autotask. And if we go ahead and we view this invoice, you'll see that it now has the same invoice number as Xero. So it really is as simple as that. If you're enjoying the content of this video, I would really appreciate it if you could go over to Buy Me a Coffee / Chris Timm. You know, subscribe to the video. It really does help me, helps to make some more of these videos, and really appreciate you watching. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you on the next video.